Blood splattered across Adelaide Morrison's cream-colored bodice as Calvin Miller's hand struck her face for the third time that day. Despite the metallic taste filling her mouth and the throbbing pain in her cheek, she forced her lips to curve upward, just as she'd done for the past 2 years since becoming Mrs. Miller in the mining town of Ruby City, Idaho, in the summer of 1882. "That's better," Calvin sneered, brushing his knuckles against his expensive waistcoat. "A wife should always greet her husband with a smile." He gestured toward the cold dinner on the table. "And a hot meal." Adelaide nodded, the smile frozen on her face as she gathered the plates, careful to move gently so as not to aggravate her bruised ribs. At 22, she had already learned that survival sometimes meant smiling through the worst pain imaginable. Her mother had taught her that right before consumption took her 3 years ago, leaving Adelaide alone with no choice but to accept the first proposal that came her way. "I'm sorry, Calvin," she murmured, her voice as practiced and hollow as her smile. "The stove was giving me trouble again." "I'll have it heated in no time. See that you do." Calvin dropped into his chair, pulling out his pocket watch. "I have business at the saloon in an hour. Important matters that a simple woman wouldn't understand." Adelaide knew what those important matters entailed: whiskey, cards, and the company of the painted ladies who worked upstairs at the Gilded Nugget. On those nights, she almost felt relief when Calvin didn't return home until dawn. As she reheated his dinner, Adelaide caught a glimpse of her reflection in the small mirror hanging by the kitchen doorway. A purple bruise was already forming beneath her right eye, joining the faded yellow one on her jaw. She adjusted her auburn hair to better conceal the marks and fixed her smile back in place before serving Calvin his meal. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, autumn painting the surrounding mountains with splashes of gold and crimson. Adelaide rose before the sun, as she always did, to prepare Calvin's breakfast and pack his lunch for the mine. He had returned home late, stinking of cheap perfume and whiskey, and would be in a foul mood upon waking. She moved quietly through their small cabin on the edge of town, wincing with each step. Last night's affections had left fresh bruises blooming across her pale skin like poisonous flowers. "Adelaide," Calvin's voice boomed from the bedroom. "Where's my coffee?" "Coming right away," she called back, her voice light and pleasant as she poured the steaming liquid into his favorite mug. Taking a deep breath, Adelaide fixed her smile in place before entering the bedroom. Calvin was sitting on the edge of the bed, his dark hair disheveled and his eyes bloodshot. He snatched the coffee from her hands without a word of thanks. "I need you to go into town today," he ordered after taking a long sip. "We're hosting the foreman and his wife for dinner tomorrow. I expect you to make a good impression. Buy a decent cut of meat for once." Adelaide nodded obediently. "Of course, Calvin. I'll make sure everything is perfect. And do something about your face," he added with a dismissive wave. "Can't have people thinking I married a clumsy woman who's always walking into doors." After Calvin left for the mine, Adelaide cleaned the house methodically, finding comfort in the familiar routine. She applied powder to the worst of her bruises and pinned her hair carefully before heading into town. The small allowance Calvin had grudgingly provided clutched tightly in her hand. Ruby City had grown considerably in the 3 years since the silver strike that had transformed it from a sleepy outpost to a bustling mining town. The main street was lined with false-fronted businesses: a general store, a bank, 2 hotels, and 3 saloons that never seemed to close their doors. Ladies in fashionable dresses strolled alongside miners in dirt-encrusted clothes, while wagons laden with supplies navigated the rutted streets. Adelaide made her way to Willoughby's general store, keeping her eyes downcast to avoid unnecessary conversation. The last thing she needed was for Mrs. Willoughby to comment on her bruises again or, worse, express pity. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," George Willoughby called cheerfully from behind the counter. His smile faltered slightly when he noticed her face, but he quickly recovered. "What can I help you with today?" Adelaide recited her list: flour, sugar, coffee, and information about any fresh meat available for the important dinner. As Mr. Willoughby gathered her items, the bell above the door jingled, announcing the arrival of another customer. "Well, if it isn't Ethan Hawkins himself." "Thought you'd be halfway to Montana by now," Willoughby exclaimed. Adelaide couldn't help but turn toward the newcomer. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright morning sun, tall and broad-shouldered. As he stepped inside, she could see he wasn't from Ruby City. Everything about him, from his weathered duster to the worn leather chaps, and the revolver holstered low on his hip, spoke of a man who lived by his own rules on the open range. "Plans changed, George," the man replied, his voice deep and smooth like good whiskey. "Figured I'd winter here before heading north." His eyes, blue as a summer sky, scanned the store before landing on Adelaide. Unlike most men who either leered at her or looked away in awkward embarrassment when they noticed her bruises, this stranger's gaze was direct and unflinching. There was no pity there, only a quiet assessment that made her feel strangely exposed. Adelaide quickly looked away, focusing on counting out her coins to pay for her purchases. "Mrs. Miller here is married to Calvin Miller, you remember him. Works as a shift boss at the Silver Bell mine now," Willoughby explained. The cowboy Ethan Hawkins nodded slightly. "I remember." Something in his tone made Adelaide glance up again. Their eyes met briefly, and she automatically smiled the same empty smile she gave everyone in town who knew her situation, but did nothing to help. Ethan didn't smile back. Instead, he studied her face for a moment longer before saying in a low voice that somehow carried clearly to her ears, "Never smile unless you mean it, madam. Life's too short for false pleasantries." Adelaide's practiced smile faltered, her cheeks burning with an emotion she couldn't immediately identify. Embarrassment, shame, or perhaps the first flicker of defiance she'd felt in years. "I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Hawkins," she replied, gathering her purchases with as much dignity as she could muster before hurrying out of the store. Behind her, she heard Willoughby's reproachful, "Now, Ethan, that wasn't called for," followed by the stranger's unapologetic response, "Some things need saying, George, even in Ruby City." As Adelaide made her way back home, the cowboy's words echoed in her mind, "Never smile unless you mean it." Such a simple concept, yet so foreign to her existence. When was the last time she had genuinely smiled? She couldn't remember. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Adelaide caught herself humming a small act of rebellion inspired by a stranger's blunt advice. When Calvin returned, she served his meal without her usual forced smile, keeping her expression neutral instead. "What's wrong with your face?" Calvin demanded, immediately noticing the change. "Nothing," Adelaide replied softly. "Just tired." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist painfully. "Did I ask if you were tired? You look at me proper when I come home, understand?" Adelaide nodded, summoning the expected smile. But something had shifted inside her. A tiny seed of resistance had been planted by a blue-eyed cowboy who didn't even know her name. The next day, while shopping for the dinner party, Adelaide encountered Ethan Hawkins again. He was loading supplies into saddlebags outside the general store, preparing for what looked like a long ride. "Mrs. Miller," he acknowledged with a tip of his hat. Adelaide nodded politely. "Mr. Hawkins." She noticed he was purchasing supplies that suggested he wasn't staying in town. "I thought you were wintering in Ruby City. Found a line cabin about 10 miles out that suits me better than town," he explained. "Belongs to the Circle H Ranch. Owner's letting me use it in exchange for some work." Adelaide nodded, understanding the desire to escape the cramped confines of Ruby City. She often dreamed of open spaces where she could breathe freely. "I should apologize for yesterday," Ethan said unexpectedly. "It wasn't my place to comment on your—" He gestured vaguely toward her face. "My smile," Adelaide supplied. "Or my bruises." Ethan's expression remained steady. "Both, I suppose." Adelaide glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "Most people in this town pretend not to notice." "Your honesty was refreshing if uncomfortable." "Honesty often is," he replied. Then, nodding toward the packages in her arms, he added, "Need help carrying those?" She shook her head. "No, thank you. My husband wouldn't approve." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly at the mention of Calvin, but he simply nodded. "Offer stands, should you ever need anything." As Adelaide turned to leave, he added quietly, "I meant what I said yesterday, Mrs. Miller, about smiling." She paused, then replied without turning back. "In my experience, Mr. Hawkins, women don't always have the luxury of sincerity. Sometimes a smile is the only shield we have." That evening, the dinner with Calvin's foreman and his wife proceeded exactly as expected. Adelaide served an excellent meal, smiled at all the right moments, and laughed politely at the men's crude jokes. Mrs. Prescott, the foreman's wife, spoke little but watched Adelaide with knowing eyes, occasionally glancing at the poorly concealed bruises with an expression that Adelaide recognized all too well, the look of a woman who understood precisely what happened behind closed doors. When the guests finally departed, Calvin seemed satisfied. "You did well enough," he conceded, which was as close to praise as he ever came. "Though you could have laughed more at Mr. Prescott's stories. Man controls my advancement at the mine." "I'm sorry, Calvin," Adelaide automatically responded. "I'll do better next time," he grunted, already pouring himself another whiskey. "I'm heading to the Gilded Nugget, don't wait up." After he left, Adelaide sank into a chair, exhaustion overwhelming her. The smile she'd maintained all evening had made her face ache almost as much as her bruises. Ethan Hawkins' words returned to her, "Never smile unless you mean it." Easy for a man to say, particularly one who answered to no one but himself, yet the idea lingered, tantalizing in its simplicity. What would it be like to only express what she truly felt? To let her face reflect the emptiness and pain that had become her daily existence? The following week brought an unexpected change to Adelaide's routine. Calvin announced he'd be traveling to Boise for mining business and would be gone for nearly a fortnight. "You'll have my wages from last month to manage the household," he informed her as he packed. "And I expect this place to be spotless when I return. No entertaining while I'm gone. I'll know if you've had visitors." Adelaide nodded dutifully, struggling to contain the wave of relief washing over her. 2 weeks without walking on eggshells, without carefully measuring every word and expression. 2 weeks for her body to heal without fresh injuries. "Yes, Calvin," she replied, the smile on her face more genuine than any she'd given him in years, not from happiness at his words, but at the prospect of his absence. He narrowed his eyes, perhaps detecting the subtle difference. "Remember your place, Adelaide. This town talks, and nothing happens here that I won't eventually hear about." After Calvin departed on the eastbound stage, Adelaide spent the first day simply existing without fear. She moved through the cabin at her own pace, humming freely as she cleaned. That afternoon, she decided to treat herself to a rare luxury, a visit to Ruby City's small lending library, housed in the back room of the schoolhouse. The schoolmistress, Miss Sophia Bennet, greeted Adelaide warmly. "Mrs. Miller, what a pleasant surprise. We've just received several new volumes from back east." Adelaide browsed the shelves with genuine pleasure, eventually selecting a well-worn copy of Jane Eyre. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with a solid chest. "Pardon me, madam," Ethan Hawkins said, steadying her with a gentle hand on her elbow. Adelaide stepped back, surprised to see the cowboy in the library. "Mr. Hawkins, I didn't expect to find you here." The corner of his mouth lifted in a slight smile. "Even cowboys read, Mrs. Miller. Especially during long winter nights in a line cabin." Miss Bennet approached with a stack of books. "Here are the volumes you requested, Mr. Hawkins. Quite the eclectic selection: Thoreau, Shakespeare, and a manual on animal husbandry." "A man contains multitudes, Miss Bennet," Ethan replied with a wink that made the schoolmistress blush. Adelaide found herself curious about this contradiction, a rugged cowboy who quoted Walt Whitman and read Shakespeare. As they left the schoolhouse together, she commented, "You're not what you appear to be, are you, Mr. Hawkins?" "Few people are," he responded. Then, noticing her book, he added, "Good choice, though a bit dark for some tastes." "I find comfort in stories of women who overcome difficult circumstances," Adelaide admitted. Ethan studied her face, which was healing in Calvin's absence. "Your husband's away," he observed. "It wasn't a question." "For 2 weeks," she confirmed. "Business in boys." He nodded thoughtfully. "The bruises are fading." Adelaide instinctively raised a hand to her cheek, then forced herself to lower it. "Yes, and your smile seems different today," he continued, his blue eyes intent on her face. "Does it?" Adelaide wasn't sure how to respond to his direct observations. "It reaches your eyes now," Ethan said simply. "Makes quite a difference." Before Adelaide could reply, Mrs. Willoughby emerged from the general store, her sharp eyes immediately taking in the sight of Adelaide conversing with the handsome cowboy. "I should go," Adelaide murmured, suddenly remembering Calvin's warning about town gossip. "Thank you for the literary discussion, Mr. Hawkins." He tipped his hat, understanding her sudden withdrawal. "Anytime, Mrs. Miller." Over the next few days, Adelaide found herself thinking about Ethan Hawkins far more than was proper for a married woman. There was something about his directness, his refusal to participate in the town's collective blind eye to her situation, that both unsettled and attracted her. On Saturday morning, Adelaide was returning from purchasing fresh eggs when she heard rapid hoofbeats and shouts of alarm. A team of horses pulling a heavily loaded wagon had bolted, careening down Ruby City's main street toward a group of children playing near the church. Without thinking, Adelaide dropped her basket and ran toward the children, managing to pull 2 of them to safety. As she reached for a third child, the wagon bore down upon them with frightening speed. Suddenly, a blur of motion swept past her, Ethan Hawkins leaping from his horse directly onto the runaway wagon. He grappled with the reins, muscles straining as he fought to control the panicked team. The wagon lurched violently, nearly throwing him off, but Ethan held firm. Gradually, he brought the horses under control, guiding them away from the gathered townspeople and toward an open area where they could safely slow to a stop. A cheer went up from the onlookers as the danger passed. Adelaide stood frozen, the child she'd rescued clinging to her skirts, as Ethan jumped down from the wagon and handed the reins to the breathless owner who had come running after his team. "That was some display of horsemanship, Hawkins," Sheriff Donovan commented, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "Quick thinking saved some lives today." Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. His eyes sought Adelaide in the crowd, widening slightly when he saw her. He crossed to her in a few long strides. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Adelaide shook her head, suddenly aware that her heart was pounding not from the near accident but from his proximity. "No, I'm fine, thanks to you. You moved pretty quickly yourself," he observed. "Those children owe you their safety." The mother of the child still clinging to Adelaide arrived then, tearfully expressing her gratitude to both of them. As the crowd dispersed, Adelaide found herself walking alongside Ethan toward the spot where she dropped her basket. "You're shaking," he noted, concern evident in his voice. Adelaide looked down at her trembling hands. "I suppose I am. It's not every day one nearly witnesses a tragedy." Ethan bent to retrieve her scattered purchases, carefully gathering the few eggs that hadn't broken. As he handed her the basket, their fingers brushed, sending an unexpected jolt through Adelaide's body. "Perhaps you should sit down for a moment," Ethan suggested, gesturing toward a bench outside the barber shop. "Allow yourself to recover from the shock." Adelaide hesitated, acutely aware of the many eyes watching them. "I don't think that would be wise, Mr. Hawkins. People talk in Ruby City." "Let them," he replied with a shrug. "You've done nothing wrong." But Adelaide knew better. In a town like Ruby City, a married woman conversing with a single man, especially one as handsome and mysterious as Ethan Hawkins, was fodder for gossip. And gossip had a way of reaching Calvin's ears, no matter how far away he might be. "Thank you for your concern," she said formally, taking a step back, "and for your heroism today. Good day, Mr. Hawkins." As she walked away, Adelaide could feel his eyes on her back, and it took all her willpower not to turn around. That night, Adelaide couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the runaway wagon, the terrified children, and Ethan Hawkins leaping fearlessly into danger. More disturbingly, she kept feeling the phantom touch of his fingers against hers, and the intensity in his blue eyes when he'd asked if she was hurt. These thoughts were dangerous, more dangerous than Calvin's fists. These were thoughts that could lead a desperate woman to make reckless decisions. Adelaide knew she needed to avoid Ethan Hawkins for the remainder of Calvin's absence. No good could come from the feelings stirring within her. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 3 days later, Adelaide was returning from delivering a pie to elderly Mrs. Gunderson when a sudden autumn storm swept through the valley. The sky darkened ominously, and within minutes, rain was pouring down in sheets, accompanied by jagged lightning and booming thunder. Adelaide quickened her pace, but she was still a good mile from home when hail began to fall, first pea-sized, then quickly growing to the size of walnuts. She took shelter under a large pine tree, knowing it was dangerous during lightning but having no other options. The storm intensified, the hailstones striking with enough force to strip leaves from trees and raise welts on exposed skin. Adelaide huddled against the trunk, her thin shawl providing little protection against the onslaught. Just as she was beginning to fear she might have to make a run for it through the storm, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Ethan Hawkins appeared through the curtain of rain, his horse moving carefully on the slippery ground. Without a word, he dismounted and removed his heavy canvas duster, wrapping it around Adelaide's shoulders. "Come on," he shouted over the storm. "My cabin's just over the ridge, closer than town." Adelaide hesitated only briefly before allowing him to help her onto his horse. She had little choice. The storm was worsening, and hypothermia was a real danger. Ethan swung up behind her, one arm securing her against his chest while the other held the reins. The ride to the line cabin was a blur of cold rain, stinging hail, and the solid warmth of Ethan's body against her back. By the time they arrived, both were soaked to the skin despite his duster. The cabin was small but neat, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves containing the books he'd borrowed from the library. Ethan quickly built up the fire while Adelaide stood dripping on the plank floor, uncertain what to do. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly, moving to a trunk from which he pulled a flannel shirt and a pair of woolen trousers. "These will be too big, but they're dry. I'll step outside while you change." "You'll get soaked again," Adelaide protested. "I'll wait in the lean-to with the horse," he replied, heading for the door. "Take your time. There's coffee in the pot by the fire if you want to heat it up." Left alone, Adelaide changed quickly, embarrassed by the intimacy of wearing a man's clothes, a man who wasn't her husband. The flannel shirt smelled of soap and pine, and something essentially masculine that she recognized as Ethan's scent. The trousers were comically large, but she rolled up the legs and tightened the waist with a piece of rope she found on the table. When Ethan returned, his eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in his clothes, her long auburn hair loose around her shoulders as it dried by the fire. He quickly looked away, busying himself with hanging their wet garments near the fireplace. "Storm's settling in for the duration," he commented, removing his sodden boots. "Might be a few hours before it's safe to head back to town." Adelaide nodded, acutely aware of the impropriety of their situation. "Thank you for sheltering me, Mr. Hawkins. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "Ethan," he corrected. "Seems a bit formal to stand on ceremony when you're wearing my clothes." A reluctant smile tugged at her lips. "Ethan, then, and you should call me Adelaide." He nodded, moving to the stove where he began preparing a simple meal of beans and bacon. Adelaide watched him work, noting the efficient way he moved around the small space. "You've lived alone for a long time, haven't you?" she asked. Ethan glanced up from his cooking. "Most of my adult life." "Why do you ask?" "You're self-sufficient," she observed. "Not many men know how to care for themselves so thoroughly." "Necessity is a good teacher," he replied with a shrug. "My father died when I was 16, had to grow up fast." As they shared the modest meal, Adelaide found herself telling Ethan things she'd never spoken aloud to anyone, how she'd married Calvin out of desperation after her mother's death left her destitute. How the first blow had come just 2 weeks after their wedding. How she'd gradually lost pieces of herself, until smiling on command became as natural as breathing. Ethan listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing but attentive understanding. When she finally fell silent, he said simply, "You deserve better, Adelaide." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but better isn't always an option for women in my position." "There are always options," he countered. "They might be difficult or frightening, but they exist." Adelaide shook her head. "You don't understand. Calvin would never grant me a divorce, and even if he did, where would I go? What would I do? I have no family, no money of my own." "You could leave," Ethan suggested. "Start fresh somewhere he couldn't find you." "As what? A scandalous woman who abandoned her husband, who would hire me, who would rent to me." Adelaide's voice rose with emotion. "And Calvin would search for me not out of love but pride. He doesn't tolerate losing what he considers his property." Ethan's jaw tightened at her words, but before he could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the cabin's windows, reminding them both of the storm still raging outside. "It's getting late," he said finally. "You should take the bed. I'll make a pallet by the fire." Adelaide began to protest, but Ethan held up a hand. "I've slept in far worse conditions, trust me." As Adelaide lay in Ethan's narrow bed that night, listening to the storm and the occasional creak of the floorboards as he shifted on his makeshift bed, she felt a strange sense of peace, despite the impropriety of her situation. For the first time in years, she was in the presence of a man who asked nothing of her, not her labor, not her body, not even her forced smile. The revelation was both liberating and terrifying. It showed her exactly what she had been missing in her life with Calvin, illuminating the darkness of her marriage like the lightning flashing outside. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world glittering with raindrops. Adelaide's clothes were dry, if somewhat wrinkled, and she changed back into them while Ethan prepared a breakfast of flapjacks and coffee. "I should get you back to town," he said as they ate. "People will be wondering where you are." Adelaide nodded, reality settling heavily upon her shoulders once more. "Yes, of course. Thank you for your hospitality." The ride back to Ruby City was conducted mostly in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the outskirts of town, Adelaide asked Ethan to let her down. "I should walk from here," she explained. "Less conspicuous." Ethan complied, though his expression showed he didn't agree. As he helped her down from the horse, he held her hands a moment longer than necessary. "Remember what I said, Adelaide, about options." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Then, gathering her courage, she looked directly into his blue eyes and smiled, a real smile that came from somewhere deep inside her, rusty from disuse but genuine. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." His answering smile warmed her more than the morning sun as she turned and walked toward town, her back straight and her head held high. Despite her attempt at discretion, Adelaide's overnight absence had not gone unnoticed. Mrs. Willoughby intercepted her almost immediately, her pinched face alight with barely concealed excitement at having fresh gossip. "Adelaide Miller, we were all so worried when you didn't return home last night. Where on earth have you been?" Adelaide had prepared for this. "I was caught in the storm while visiting Mrs. Gunderson. She insisted I stay the night rather than risk the weather." The lie came easily. Mrs. Gunderson was nearly deaf and unlikely to contradict her story if asked. Mrs. Willoughby looked disappointed at the mundane explanation. "Well, that was fortunate, I suppose, though we did wonder, especially after seeing you with that cowboy earlier in the week." Adelaide's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Hawkins. He helped save those children from the runaway wagon." "I merely thanked him, as did everyone else." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Willoughby replied, clearly unconvinced. "Still, a married woman must be mindful of appearances. I'm sure Calvin would agree." The mention of her husband's name was a stark reminder of reality. Calvin would return in less than a week, and with him would come the end of this brief period of freedom. Over the next few days, Adelaide was careful to maintain appearances, staying visible in town and giving no one reason to gossip further. She didn't see Ethan again, though she found herself looking for him whenever she ventured into Ruby City. On the evening before Calvin's expected return, Adelaide was preparing the cabin, cleaning frantically, cooking his favorite meals, and steeling herself to resume the role of dutiful, smiling wife. A knock at the door startled her from these grim preparations. Ethan Hawkins stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "You shouldn't be here," Adelaide said immediately, glancing nervously at the neighboring cabins. "Calvin returns tomorrow." "I know," Ethan replied. "That's why I came. I'm leaving Ruby City tonight." Adelaide's heart sank. "Leaving? But I thought you were wintering here." "Plans change," he said, echoing his words from their first meeting. "I've been offered work escorting a cattle drive to California." Adelaide nodded, fighting the irrational sense of abandonment that swept through her. What had she expected? That this cowboy would stay in Ruby City indefinitely? That he had any obligation to her whatsoever? "That's wonderful," she managed to say. "California must be beautiful this time of year." Ethan studied her face intently. "Come with me, Adelaide." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and electrifying. Adelaide stared at him in shock. "What did you say?" "Come with me," he repeated, stepping closer. "We could be in California before Calvin even thinks to look that far. You could start fresh, we both could." Adelaide shook her head, even as her heart raced at the prospect. "You can't mean that. You barely know me." "I know enough," Ethan insisted. "I know you're brave and kind. I know you deserve freedom and happiness. And I know that I haven't stopped thinking about you since the moment I saw you in Willoughby store." "Ethan, please," Adelaide whispered, tears threatening. "Don't say such things." "Why not? Because they're improper, or because they're true." He reached out, gently touching her cheek where the last of the bruises had finally faded. "Tell me you don't feel something between us, and I'll ride away right now." Adelaide couldn't lie, not to him and not to herself. "I do feel something," she admitted. "But that doesn't change the reality of my situation. I'm a married woman." "To a man who treats you like property," Ethan countered, "who hurts you and expects you to smile about it. And if I left with you, what then? We'd be fugitives. Calvin would never stop looking." "Maybe," Ethan acknowledged. "But California's a big place. People reinvent themselves there every day." The possibility tantalized Adelaide. A new life, free from fear and false smiles, with a man who wanted her to be authentic. But the risks were enormous, and failure would mean disaster. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This is too sudden." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The cattle drive leaves at first light from the Circle H. If you decide to come, meet me at the crossroads south of town before dawn." He hesitated, then added, "I won't think less of you if you don't come, Adelaide. It's your choice, maybe the first real one you've had in years." After he left, Adelaide sat motionless at her kitchen table for hours, weighing her options with agonizing thoroughness. To stay meant returning to a life of abuse and pretense. To go meant risking everything on a man she barely knew and a dream that seemed impossibly fragile. As midnight approached, Adelaide made her decision. Moving quickly and quietly, she packed a small carpet bag with her most essential belongings. From beneath a loose floorboard under their bed, she retrieved the emergency money she'd been secretly saving from household funds. Not much, but enough to help them get started if things went wrong. Adelaide wrote a brief note and left it on the table, then changed into her sturdiest dress and boots. Taking one last look around the cabin that had been her prison for 2 years, she slipped out into the night. The crossroads were deserted when Adelaide arrived shortly before dawn, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten. Had she misunderstood? Or had Ethan changed his mind? Minutes stretched painfully as doubt and fear crept in. Then she heard the rhythm of approaching hoofbeats. Ethan appeared, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a side saddle. When he saw Adelaide waiting, the smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "You came," he said simply. "I came," she confirmed, her own smile genuine and uninhibited. Ethan dismounted and approached her, taking her hands in his. "Are you certain, Adelaide? Once we join that cattle drive, there's no turning back." "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied. "I want to live honestly, Ethan. I want to smile when I feel joy, frown when I'm sad, and never again pretend that cruelty is acceptable." He helped her mount the mare, his hands steady and respectful. As they rode toward the Circle H ranch where the cattle drive was assembling, Adelaide felt lighter than she had in years, as if she'd shed an invisible burden somewhere back at the crossroads. The cattle drive boss, a grizzled man named Harlan Jenkins, raised an eyebrow when Ethan introduced Adelaide as his sister, recently widowed and heading west for a fresh start. The lie tasted bitter on Adelaide's tongue, but she understood its necessity. No one would accept the truth that she had left her husband to follow her heart. "Didn't know you had a sister, Hawkins," Jenkins commented, eyeing them suspiciously. "Never had cause to mention her before," Ethan replied evenly. "But I'm all the family she has now, and I promised to see her safely to California." Jenkins shrugged. "Long as she pulls her weight and doesn't slow us down, I don't care if she's your grandmother. We leave in 10 minutes. As they joined the line of riders, cattle, and supply wagons stretching along the trail, Adelaide cast one last glance at the distant silhouette of Ruby City. Somewhere in that town was the cabin where Calvin would soon arrive, expecting to find his submissive wife waiting with a false smile. Instead, he would find only a note. "I've gone to find a place where smiles are earned, not commanded." The journey to California was grueling, testing Adelaide's endurance and determination daily. The cattle drive moved slowly across Idaho, into Nevada, and finally over the Sierra Nevadas. She learned to ride for hours without complaint, to cook over open fires, to sleep under the stars, and to face each new challenge with the same quiet courage that had sustained her through years of abuse. Throughout it all, Ethan was beside her, respectful, patient, and increasingly dear to her heart. They maintained the pretense of being siblings around the other drovers, but in private moments, their growing feelings for each other became impossible to deny. One evening, as they sat slightly apart from the main camp, watching the sunset paint the Nevada desert in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan finally spoke of what lay between them. "When we reach California," he said quietly, "you'll be free to go your own way. I want you to know that." Adelaide turned to him in surprise. "Is that what you want, for us to part ways?" "No," he admitted, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "It's the last thing I want, but I need you to know that you have choices now. Real ones." Adelaide considered his words carefully. "What if my choice is you, Ethan? Not because you rescued me or because I'm grateful, but because these weeks on the trail have shown me the kind of man you truly are." Ethan reached for her hand, entwining their fingers. "I've fallen in love with you, Adelaide. Probably from that first day in the store when you gave me that empty smile, and I wanted to see what your real one looked like." "And now that you've seen it," she asked, her heart pounding, "now I want to spend my life giving you reasons to show it," he replied simply. Their first kiss was tentative, gentle, nothing like the demanding, possessive kisses Calvin had forced upon her. Ethan's lips asked rather than took, cherished rather than claimed. When they parted, Adelaide's smile came naturally, radiating genuine happiness. "There it is," Ethan murmured, tracing the curve of her lips with his fingertip. "That's the smile I've been waiting for." 2 weeks later, they crossed into California, the cattle drive finally reaching its destination near Sacramento. Adelaide and Ethan parted ways with the drovers, heading west toward San Francisco with their shares of the payment. They stopped in a small town called Oak Ridge, where the discovery of a natural hot spring had created a modest tourist trade. The area reminded Adelaide somewhat of Ruby City, but with a crucial difference: no one here knew them or their past. Using their combined savings, they purchased a small parcel of land with a weathered cabin, similar to the line cabin where they had first truly connected. The property came with a few acres of good grazing land and a stream running clear and cold from the nearby mountains. "It needs work," Ethan acknowledged as they surveyed their new home, "but the bones are good." Adelaide squeezed his hand. "It's perfect, a place to build something honest." They were married by a circuit judge who asked no questions about Adelaide's previous marriage. In California, with its gold rush history and frontier mentality, people respected the right to reinvent oneself. The past was something left behind in the places people had fled. As months passed, they transformed the cabin into a home, adding a second room, improving the roof, planting a vegetable garden that thrived in the California soil. Ethan found work breaking horses for local ranchers, his skill with difficult animals bringing steady income and growing respect in the community. Adelaide, meanwhile, discovered an unexpected talent for baking. Her pies and breads, sold first at the general store and later from a small stall of their own, became famous throughout the county. For the first time in her life, she was earning her own money, building something that belonged entirely to her. Sometimes at night, Adelaide would wake with a start, momentarily disoriented and afraid that her escape had been a dream, that she was back in Ruby City with Calvin. On those nights, Ethan would hold her close, his steady heartbeat reassuring her until she could sleep again. "He can't hurt you anymore," Ethan would whisper. "You're free, Adelaide, free to smile or frown or laugh or cry, whatever you truly feel." A year after their arrival in California, news reached them that shook Adelaide to her core. A traveler passing through Oak Ridge mentioned that a man named Calvin Miller had been killed in a mine collapse in Ruby City, Idaho. Adelaide struggled with her reaction to this news, not grief, certainly, but a complex mixture of relief, guilt, and final liberation. That night, she wept in Ethan's arms, not for the loss of the man who had abused her, but for the young woman she had been, the one who had endured so much before finding the courage to leave. "I didn't wish him dead," she said through her tears, "but I can't pretend to mourn him either." "Does that make me a terrible person?" "It makes you honest," Ethan replied, stroking her hair. "And that's all I've ever asked of you." With the shadow of Calvin's potential pursuit finally lifted, Adelaide and Ethan were truly free to build their future. In the spring of 1885, Adelaide discovered she was expecting their first child. The joy that filled their small home was palpable, radiant in every genuine smile they shared. Their son, Samuel James Hawkins, was born on a crisp November morning, with eyes as blue as his father's and a determined spirit that revealed itself from his first breath. Adelaide, holding her child in the home she had helped build with a man who cherished rather than controlled her, felt a happiness so profound it seemed almost too large for her body to contain. "Look at you," Ethan said softly, sitting beside her on the bed and gazing at her face with wonder. "I've never seen you smile like that before." Adelaide hadn't realized she was smiling, but she could feel it now, the way it made her cheeks ache pleasantly and crinkled the corners of her eyes. "I'm happy, Ethan, truly, completely happy." "That's all I ever wanted for you," he replied, gently touching their son's tiny hand. "A life where your smiles are real." As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, their home expanded as well. Ethan added a proper bedroom for their son and improved the barn to accommodate their growing livestock. Adelaide's baking business flourished, and they opened a small bake shop in town where customers came as much for her warm welcome as for her delicious pastries. In 1887, their family grew again with the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth Rose. Unlike her brother's easy arrival, Elizabeth's birth was difficult, leaving Adelaide weak and feverish for days afterward. Ethan stayed by her side constantly, caring for both children and nursing Adelaide with a tenderness that only deepened her love for him. During her recovery, Adelaide often thought about how different this illness would have been with Calvin, who had shown no patience or compassion during the few times she had been unwell in their marriage. Ethan, by contrast, revealed yet another dimension of his character, an unwavering dedication to family that transcended traditional roles and expectations. By 1890, the Hawkins family had become respected members of the Oak Ridge community. Their ranch had expanded to include a small herd of cattle and several quality horses that Ethan bred and trained. Adelaide's bakery employed 3 local women, and she had developed a reputation not only for excellent baked goods, but also for her kindness toward other women in difficult situations. On more than one occasion, a woman with suspicious bruises or fearful eyes would find her way to Adelaide's kitchen, where she would receive not only a hot meal, but also gentle understanding and practical advice about options she might not have considered. Sometimes, these women would disappear from Oakridge shortly afterward, moving on to new beginnings elsewhere. Adelaide never asked questions, simply provided what help she could, remembering her own journey to freedom. Ethan supported these quiet interventions wholeheartedly, occasionally offering work or transportation to women and children who needed to travel beyond the reach of dangerous husbands or fathers. Their home became known as a safe haven, a place where genuine smiles were valued and false ones were never required. As their children grew, Adelaide and Ethan taught them the importance of emotional honesty. "Never smile unless you mean it" became a family motto of sorts, alongside lessons about respect, consent, and the equal value of all people regardless of gender or circumstances. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Adelaide with a trip to San Francisco, the first real vacation they had taken since arriving in California. They left the children with trusted friends and spent a week exploring the vibrant city, attending the theater, dining in fine restaurants, and walking arm in arm along the bustling waterfront. In their hotel room overlooking the bay, Ethan presented Adelaide with a small velvet box containing a gold locket. Inside was a miniature photograph of their family on one side, and on the other, an inscription: "To Adelaide, whose genuine smile lights my world." "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears of happiness filling her eyes as he fastened it around her neck. "Not as beautiful as you," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "These 10 years with you, Adelaide, they've been everything I never knew I needed." That night, as they lay together in the comfortable hotel bed, Adelaide reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from the oppressive confines of her first marriage to this life of authentic joy and partnership. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking such a risk on a woman you barely knew, one with so much baggage and complications." Ethan propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with the same intensity that had captivated her from the beginning. "Not for a single moment," he assured her. "That day at the crossroads when I saw you waiting, Adelaide, it was the best moment of my life until then, and every day since has only gotten better." Their return to Oakridge brought news that would shape the next chapter of their lives. The owner of the largest ranch in the area, an elderly widower named Harrison Montgomery, had died, leaving his property without clear succession. The ranch was to be sold at auction, presenting an opportunity that Ethan and Adelaide had often discussed, but never thought possible, expanding their modest operation into a full-scale cattle ranch. Using the savings from both the bakery and Ethan's horse training business, they took the considerable risk of bidding on the Montgomery property. To their astonishment and delight, they won the auction, becoming owners of one of the most prosperous ranches in the county. The transition wasn't without challenges. Some of the longtime ranch hands were skeptical about working for a woman as much as a man, as Adelaide insisted on being an equal partner in all ranch decisions. But her intelligence, fair-mindedness, and genuine respect for their expertise gradually won them over. Samuel, now 7, and Elizabeth, 5, thrived in the expanded space of the ranch, developing riding skills that impressed even the most experienced cowboys. Samuel showed his father's affinity for horses, while Elizabeth revealed an unexpected talent for understanding cattle behavior that made her a favorite among the ranch hands. By 1895, the Hawkins Ranch had gained a reputation throughout California for quality stock and fair business practices. Their brand, a simple design featuring an H with a smile beneath, it became known for integrity and excellence. That spring, as they celebrated Elizabeth's 8th birthday, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Sheriff Thomas Donovan from Ruby City, Idaho, considerably grayer than when Adelaide had last seen him, appeared on their doorstep. Adelaide's heart froze when she recognized him, old fears rushing back despite the years of safety. Ethan moved protectively to her side as they invited the sheriff into their home. "Mrs. Miller, or Hawkins, I should say," Donovan began awkwardly after declining refreshment. "I've been looking for you for some time." "Why?" Ethan asked directly. "My wife has done nothing wrong." Donovan raised his hands placatingly. "I'm not here to make trouble, just to deliver something that's rightfully hers." From his coat pocket, he withdrew a legal document. After Calvin Miller died, some inconsistencies were discovered in the mine's bookkeeping. Turns out he had been embezzling funds for years, quite substantial amounts. When the company investigated, they found most of the money in a bank account in Boise. Adelaide listened in shock as Donovan continued. "Since you were his legal wife and he died without a will, the courts have been trying to locate you as his rightful heir. The company took back what was stolen from them, but there was still a considerable sum remaining. This document confirms your right to claim it." He handed the paper to Adelaide, who took it with trembling hands. "I don't want his money," she said firmly. "That's your choice, madam," Donovan replied, "but I thought you should know about it. Seems like poetic justice. Somehow that the man who controlled you so tightly in life would end up providing for your freedom after his death." After the sheriff departed, promising to respect their privacy regarding their location, Adelaide and Ethan discussed what to do with this unexpected inheritance. "We don't need Calvin's money," Adelaide insisted. "We've built all this ourselves." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "That's true. But perhaps there's a way to turn something that came from cruelty into something good." In the end, they decided to use Calvin's money to establish the New Beginnings Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to helping women and children escape abusive situations and build independent lives. The foundation provided safe housing, education, legal assistance, and small business loans to women starting fresh. The first New Beginnings shelter opened in San Francisco in 1896, with Adelaide traveling regularly from the ranch to oversee its operation. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding, transforming the dark legacy of her first marriage into a force for positive change. As their children entered adolescence, Adelaide and Ethan faced new challenges as parents. Samuel, at 13, was testing boundaries and questioning authority in ways that sometimes tested Ethan's patience. Elizabeth, 11 and fiercely independent, chafed against the societal expectations for young ladies that even progressive California still maintained. Through these adolescent storms, Adelaide and Ethan maintained the foundation of honest communication they had established from the beginning. They encouraged their children to express their true feelings, even difficult ones, and modeled the respectful resolution of disagreements in their own relationship. "Remember," Adelaide often told them, "in this family, we value truth over pleasantry. A genuine frown that leads to understanding is worth more than 100 false smiles." In 1900, as a new century dawned, the Hawkins family welcomed an unexpected addition. A young woman named Maria arrived at their ranch, visibly pregnant and bearing signs of abuse. She had heard about Adelaide's work with the New Beginnings Foundation and had traveled from Arizona seeking help. Adelaide and Ethan offered her sanctuary, intending it to be temporary until arrangements could be made for her at one of the foundation's shelters. But when Maria went into premature labor just days after arriving, the plan changed. Her son, born tiny but determined, needed constant care for his first weeks of life. As the weeks stretched into months, Maria and her son, whom she named Gabriel, became part of the household. Maria's skills as a seamstress complemented the ranch operations, and her gentle presence added another dimension to their family circle. When Gabriel was 6 months old, Maria approached Adelaide and Ethan with a difficult request. She had received a job offer in San Francisco, a legitimate opportunity with a respected dressmaking establishment, but worried about caring for Gabriel while working. "Would you?" She began hesitantly. "Would you consider keeping Gabriel with you until I'm established? I would visit whenever possible, send money for his care. I just want him to be safe, and there's no place safer than with you both." Adelaide and Ethan exchanged a glance, an entire conversation passing between them without words. At 40, Adelaide had thought her child-raising years were winding down. Ethan, at 45, had been looking forward to more time alone with his wife as their children grew more independent. Yet neither could deny the attachment they had formed to the sunny-natured baby. "He would be welcomed as our own," Ethan assured Maria, "for as long as needed." Maria's arrangement, initially intended to last a few months, eventually evolved into a unique shared family situation. She established herself successfully in San Francisco, visiting regularly and maintaining a meaningful presence in Gabriel's life, while Adelaide and Ethan provided his day-to-day care and stability. Gabriel brought renewed energy and joy to the ranch, adored by his older siblings Samuel and Elizabeth, who took their responsibilities as part-time brother and sister seriously. He grew into a curious, kind-hearted boy with Maria's dark eyes and affinity for art. In 1905, when Samuel was 20 and Elizabeth 18, both made decisions that reflected the values they had been raised with. Samuel declined an opportunity to attend an Eastern university, choosing instead to formalize his partnership in the ranch operations. His innovations in breeding techniques and sustainable grazing practices brought new prosperity to the already successful Hawkins ranch. Elizabeth, much to the surprise of the local community, announced her intention to attend medical school, one of the few institutions beginning to accept female students. Her interest had been sparked by helping deliver a foal during a difficult birth when the veterinarian couldn't arrive in time. "Are you certain?" Adelaide asked, not discouraging her daughter but ensuring she understood the challenges ahead. "It won't be an easy path." Elizabeth's determined expression was so like Ethan's that Adelaide had to smile. "The things most worth doing rarely are, Mother. You and Father taught me that." With their older children pursuing their passions and 10-year-old Gabriel thriving in their care, Adelaide and Ethan entered middle age with a sense of fulfillment that neither had dared to imagine during their earlier years. The New Beginnings Foundation had expanded to 3 locations, helping hundreds of women and children start fresh. The ranch prospered, employing dozens of workers who were treated with respect and fair wages. In the quiet evenings when the work was done, they would often sit together on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the rolling hills that had become their kingdom. Sometimes they spoke of the journey that had brought them there, the frightened woman with the false smile, the blunt cowboy who demanded honesty, the stormy night in a line cabin that had changed everything. "You remember what you wrote in that note to Calvin?" Ethan asked one such evening, his hand warm around hers. "I've gone to find a place where smiles are earned, not commanded. Did you find it, Adelaide?" She turned to him, her face softened by the years but still lighting up with the genuine smile that had first captured his heart. "I found it the moment you told me never to smile unless I meant it," she replied. "Everything since then has just been building our home in that place." Ethan leaned over to kiss her, the tenderness between them undimmed by nearly 25 years together. "Your real smile," he murmured against her lips, "is still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, Adelaide reflected on the extraordinary journey from terrified young bride to confident, accomplished woman. She had survived darkness and found not just safety but genuine joy, built not just a house but a true home, created not just a family but a legacy of compassion and authenticity. And it had all begun with a simple truth spoken by a straight-talking cowboy: never smile unless you mean it. In the years that followed, Adelaide and Ethan watched with pride as their unconventional family continued to evolve and flourish. Samuel eventually married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, combining their lands and expertise to create one of the most innovative cattle operations in California. Elizabeth completed medical school against considerable odds, returning to Oak Ridge to establish a practice that served the community with skill and compassion. Gabriel, under the shared guidance of Adelaide, Ethan, and his birth mother Maria, grew into a young man who embodied the best qualities of all three: Maria's artistic sensitivity, Adelaide's quiet strength, and Ethan's unwavering integrity. The New Beginnings Foundation became Adelaide's enduring legacy to the world beyond their ranch, helping generations of women find their authentic voices and build lives free from abuse and false smiles. The foundation's simple motto, inscribed above the door of every shelter, told their story in 9 words: "Never smile unless you mean it. Never stay where you can't." On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and countless lives they had touched, Adelaide and Ethan renewed the vows they had made that long-ago day in a judge's office. The words were different now, richer, deeper, informed by decades of partnership, but the essence remained the same: a promise to honor each other's truth, to cherish each genuine expression, and to create a space where real smiles could flourish. "I never imagined, standing at that crossroads before dawn, that life could be this full," Adelaide told Ethan that night as they danced slowly on the porch of their ranch house, silver-haired but still light on their feet. "Thank you for teaching me that I deserved more than survival, that I deserved joy." Ethan's blue eyes, crinkled now with age but still sharp and clear, held the same admiration they had shown her from the beginning. "And thank you, Adelaide Hawkins, for having the courage to believe me, for being brave enough to reach for that joy with both hands." As they danced beneath the stars, Adelaide's smile, genuine, radiant, and hard-won, illuminated their shared path forward into whatever adventures remained in the years ahead. It was a smile that had been earned, not commanded, a smile that meant everything,